In November 1950, the temperature at the Chosin Reservoir dropped to 40 below zero. Marines pried open cans of beans and found them frozen into solid bricks. They couldn't light fires. Smoke drew enemy artillery, so they tucked the cans inside their jackets against bare skin and waited hours for body heat to thaw dinner. Number 14 on this list, saved lives by accident. Number 3, killed men who trusted it. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down 25 brutal meals American soldiers ate in the frozen trenches. Number 25, frozen bean and frankfurter sea rations. This was the meal that taught every new soldier in Korea what the cold could really do. The sea ration bean and frankfurter can looked harmless enough on a supply table back at the depot. Pork and beans, a few chopped franks, tomato sauce, all sealed in a green tin the size of your fist. In a Georgia summer, it was a decent lunch. On a Korean ridgeline in December, it was a hockey puck. The sauce froze first, locking the beans into a single frozen mass that would not move, even when you turned the can upside down and shook it. Men learned to stab the top with a bayonet, pry out chunks, and suck on them like hard candy until their own mouth heat softened the food enough to chew. A single can held around 400 calories, and out there a man burned 5,000 or 6,000 a day just staying alive. So you ate it frozen, or you did not eat. There was no third option. Number 24, Hardtack biscuits. The Army swore it had retired hardtack decades earlier, but the flat, tooth-cracking cracker found its way into Korean supply lines anyway, tucked into ration boxes as the bread that would never spoil. These dense squares of flour and water were baked until every trace of moisture was gone, which meant they could ride in a truck for a year and come out exactly as hard as the day they were made. Soldiers dunked them in coffee, in soup, in melted snow, anything warm enough to soften the edges without shattering a filling. Some men crumbled them into their frozen bean cans to bulk up a thin meal. The taste was nothing, chalk and paste, but the point was never flavor. A single biscuit delivered calories that stuck to your ribs through a long night on watch. And when the supply trucks could not clear the mountain passes, hardtack was often the only thing between a rifle company and an empty stomach. Number 23, powdered eggs. Ask any veteran of Korea about breakfast and watch his face change. Powdered eggs came in tins as a fine yellow dust, and cooks in field kitchens mixed them with water and whipped them into something that was technically scrambled eggs and spiritually a betrayal. The texture was rubbery and slick at once, greenish at the edges, with a faint sulfur smell that clung to the mess tent. Men choked them down because they were hot and because protein was protein, but nobody pretended to enjoy it. The bitter joke was that powdered eggs tasted better the colder and hungrier you got, which meant by January most of the peninsula found them almost edible. When the real thing was 3,000 miles away, in an Iowa henhouse, powder was what you had. The men who came home spent the rest of their lives refusing eggs that came from a box. Number 22, instant coffee. Coffee kept the Korean War moving, but the instant crystals that came in the sea ration accessory pack tested a man's patience in the cold. Each meal unit included a tiny foil packet of soluble coffee, barely a spoonful, meant to be stirred into a canteen cup of hot water. The problem was the water. In a frozen foxhole, there was no hot water, only snow, and snow had to be melted over a heat tab that took forever and glowed just bright enough to worry the man next to you. When it finally worked, that thin brown cup was worth more than gold. Soldiers cradled it in both hands, breathing the steam, letting it thaw their fingers before it thawed their insides. The coffee was weak and never quite hot enough, but it was the closest thing to comfort the trench offered, and men would trade cigarettes, rations, almost anything for an extra packet of those cheap crystals. Number 21, corned beef hash. The canned corned beef hash was one of the few sea ration meals that men actually fought over. which tells you everything about how low the bar had sunk. Shredded salted beef, mixed with diced potato, packed dense into a tin. It fried up crisp on a hot mess kit lid and turned into something that almost resembled a real breakfast. The fat content was the whole appeal. In the cold, fat was survival, and the greasy hash carried enough to keep a man warm from the inside for an hour or two. The trouble, again, was the freeze. A frozen hash can had to be thawed nearly through before it could be scraped out, and men held it against their bodies through entire watches to get it there. When it worked, it was a small victory. When the can froze solid and the heat tabs ran out, it was one more brick in a pack that already weighed too much. Number 20. Spam. The pink canned pork luncheon meat that had marched across every front in World War II showed up in Korea too, and by then, the troops had a complicated relationship with it. Spam was salty, fatty, and nearly indestructible, which made it perfect for a war where nothing could be refrigerated. Sliced, thick, and fried, it browned into something that passed for real meat. Diced into rice or beans, it made a thin meal feel substantial. The salt that preserved it also made men desperately thirsty, a real danger in the cold where dehydration crept up quietly. Still, of all the canned meats a soldier might pull from a ration box, Spam was among the more welcome. It did not pretend to be fancy. It was fat and salt and protein in a tin. And in a frozen trench, that combination was closer to a gift than a burden. Men who swore they'd never touch it again ate every bite anyway. Number 19. Ham and lima beans. Here is the meal that soldiers hated so completely that the polite version of its nickname was ham and limas, and the version they actually used cannot be printed. This C ration unit paired chunks of fatty ham with pale lima beans in a thin, greasy sauce, and something about the combination turned men's stomachs, even when they were starving. The limas went mealy and gray. The ham fat congealed the second it left the can, coating everything in a slick white film that no heat tab could fully melt. Trading was fierce. A man stuck with ham and limas would offer 2 other cans, a pack of cigarettes, anything to swap it away. It says something that in a war where men ate frozen beans off a bayonet, this was the meal they drew the line at. It was the ration nobody wanted, and everybody eventually was forced to eat. First pattern break. Here is where the truth about eating in Korea gets brutal. The enemy in the winter of 1950 was not just the Chinese and North Korean armies. It was the cold itself, and the cold attacked the food supply as viciously as any soldier. At the Chosin Reservoir, temperatures fell to 20, 30, sometimes 40 degrees below zero, and at those numbers a can of C rations froze all the way through in minutes. Cooks could not run field kitchens near the front because smoke and light drew fire. Supply trucks could not climb the icy mountain roads, so men carried their food on their bodies, tucking cans inside their parkas, sitting on them, sleeping with them, doing anything to steal enough warmth to make a meal chewable. A frozen ration could crack a tooth. Eating too much of it too fast could drop a man's core temperature and kill him. In Korea, the simple act of eating dinner became one more way the winter tried to finish you. Number 18. Frozen canned peaches. The canned fruit in a ration box was supposed to be the reward, the small sweetness at the end of a miserable meal. Sliced peaches in syrup, fruit cocktail, pears, packed in heavy tins that men looked forward to all day. Then winter turned them into something else entirely. The syrup froze into a peach-flavored ice, and the fruit locked inside it like insects in amber. Some men gave up and ate them like a snow cone, chipping off frozen sweet shards with a spoon. Others swore the frozen peaches were the best thing going, a dessert the cold had accidentally invented and saved them for the worst nights. After a day of frozen beans and gray limas, a mouthful of icy peach syrup tasted like a memory of home, and men chased that feeling even when it made their teeth ache. Number 17. Chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable, and the letters SOS stood for a phrase that put the meal exactly where the men felt it belonged. Chipped beef on toast was thin slices of dried, heavily salted beef stirred into a white flour and milk gravy and poured over whatever bread the field kitchen could produce. When a hot version could actually be served behind the lines, it was one of the most filling meals a soldier got. The salt of the beef seasoning the whole gravy, the bread soaking up the cream until it went soft and heavy. Veterans who had eaten it on bases in World War II recognized it instantly. It stretched a little dried beef across a lot of men and sat in the stomach like ballast. The men complained out of habit, then wiped their mess kits clean, because a hot plate of SOS behind the lines beat a frozen can on the ridge every single time. Number 16. Dehydrated potatoes. Long before instant mashed potatoes sat on grocery shelves, the Army was reconstituting potato flakes in field kitchens across Korea. The dried flakes came in large tins, and cooks whipped them with hot water and powdered milk into a pale mash that was more paste than potato. Done well, with a little melted fat stirred through, it was hot and heavy and exactly what a freezing man wanted. Done poorly, with lukewarm water, it turned gluey and bland, sticking to the roof of the mouth in a stubborn lump. Either way, men ate it, because a scoop of hot mash was warmth you could hold on a spoon. Ladled next to a slab of Spam or under a spoonful of gravy, it was the closest thing to a home-cooked side dish the war offered. It was not good, it was warm and filling, and in that winter, warm and filling was almost the same thing as good. Number 15. Canned beef stew. The beef stew C ration was one of the better cards a soldier could draw, and everyone knew it. Chunks of beef, carrots, potatoes, and a thick brown gravy packed into a tin that, when finally heated all the way through, actually resembled a meal a person might eat on purpose. That was the catch, though. The same catch as everything else in Korea. Beef stew was dense, and dense food froze hardest and thawed slowest. A frozen stew can was a lump of iced gravy with vegetables suspended inside, and getting it hot meant nursing it over a heat tab far longer than the little fuel block wanted to burn. Men often gave up halfway and ate it warm in the middle and frozen at the edges. But when there was time and fuel and a moment of quiet, a hot can of beef stew was a small miracle. The one ration that made a man feel, for 10 minutes, like the Army had not entirely forgotten he was human. Number 14. Tootsie Rolls. Here is the meal that saved lives by accident, and it started with a mistake. At the Chosin Reservoir, a surrounded Marine unit radioed for an urgent resupply of 60mm mortar rounds, which carried the code name Tootsie Rolls. Somewhere down the line, the code got lost, and when the airdrop parachutes came down, the crates were full of actual Tootsie Roll candy. It should have been a disaster. Instead, it was salvation. The men discovered that the little chocolate rolls did not freeze into rocks the way everything else did. They stayed just chewable enough to eat, and each one was a dense hit of sugar and calories that a starving, freezing Marine could swallow on the move without stopping to thaw anything. Men lived on them for days. There are even stories of Marines warming the candy in their mouths and using it to plug bullet holes in equipment and fuel lines where it froze hard and sealed the leak. A mistaken candy shipment became one of the most important meals of the entire campaign. Second pattern break. Here is something the history books rush past. At Chosin, the only way to feed a surrounded army was to drop food out of the sky, and airdropping food in a blizzard is its own kind of nightmare. Parachutes drifted into enemy hands, crates shattered on frozen ground, and scattered cans across the snow. And even when supplies landed clean, the men who recovered them were often too cold and exhausted to do anything but pry a can open and eat whatever was inside, frozen or not. The pilots flew through mountain valleys in weather that grounded everyone else, because a Marine's next meal might be the difference between marching out alive and freezing where he sat. Food became ammunition in the most literal sense. A crate of rations kept a man's core warm enough to keep fighting, and a man who could not eat could not survive the night. The supply run was not a convenience. It was the front line. Number 13, the tropical chocolate bar. The Army's field chocolate was engineered to be exactly one thing: fuel that would not melt or spoil. The tropical bar, descended from the wartime D-ration, was a dense block of chocolate deliberately formulated to resist heat, which had the side effect of making it nearly impossible to bite. Soldiers described it as tasting like a slightly sweet boiled potato, bitter and waxy and stubborn. You did not eat it so much as gnaw it, shaving off pieces with your teeth or a knife. But it packed roughly 600 calories into a bar that fit in a pocket, and in the cold those calories were everything. Men carried the tropical bars for emergencies, for long patrols and nights when no other food could be heated. It was a survival tool disguised as candy, and more than a few soldiers made it through a brutal stretch chewing on a chocolate bar designed to be almost inedible on purpose. Number 12, dehydrated soup and bullion. Tucked into ration packs were small cubes and packets that promised soup, and in a frozen trench, the promise of hot soup was close to sacred. A bullion cube dropped into a canteen cup of melted snow made a thin, salty broth that warmed the hands and the throat and asked almost nothing of a man too tired to cook. Dehydrated pea and bean soup came as powder that thickened in hot water into something a hungry soldier could almost mistake for a real meal. The salt was the point as much as the warmth. Men sweating and freezing at once lost salt fast, and a hot cup of bouillon put it back while it thawed their fingers. It was the easiest hot food the war offered, and on the coldest nights, when a full meal was impossible, a single steaming cup of salty broth was enough to keep a man on his feet until dawn. Number 11, crackers and processed cheese. The bread unit of a C ration often came down to a small tin of hard crackers and a companion can of processed cheese. And together they made a cold meal that needed no fire at all. That was their quiet genius. When there was no time to thaw anything, when the heat tabs were gone and the enemy was close, a man could pry open the cheese, spread it thick on a cracker with his knife, and eat without giving away his position with light or smoke. The processed cheese was rubbery and orange and full of fat, which in that cold was exactly what a body craved. Some men warmed it against their skin until it went soft. Others ate it in frozen chunks straight from the tin. It was not a meal anyone bragged about, but crackers and cheese asked nothing of a soldier except that he opened 2 cans. And on a bad night, that made it one of the most valuable things in the box. Number 10. Canned fruitcake and cookies. The dessert units in a ration box were the small mercies of the war, and canned fruitcake was one of the strangest. A dense, sweet, sticky cake packed into a tin, studded with candied fruit. It kept for what seemed like forever and delivered a heavy load of sugar and calories in every bite. Men who would sneer at fruitcake at a Christmas table back home guarded it fiercely in a Korean foxhole. The cookies were simpler, plain sweet biscuits that crumbled easily and softened in coffee, but they carried the same value. In the cold, sugar was quick energy. A shivering body could burn immediately, and the desserts were the only part of the ration engineered for pleasure rather than pure survival. A man saved his fruitcake for the low point of a long night and ate it slowly, making it last, because it was the one thing in the whole miserable box that tasted like somebody, somewhere, had wanted him to feel a little better. Number 9. Canned sausage patties. The pork sausage patties that came in some ration units were a small reminder of a real breakfast, and men treasured them for it. Packed in fat that congealed the moment the can left any source of warmth, the patties fried up on a mess kit lid into something browned and greasy and genuinely satisfying. The fat was the reason they mattered. In a frozen trench, the body screamed for it, and a couple of patties delivered dense, warming energy a can of vegetables never could. Cold from the tin, they were a slick, salty disappointment. Hot and sizzling in their own grease, They were one of the highlights of ration eating in Korea. Men planned their heat tab fuel around them, deciding a patty was worth the flame when a can of beans was not. On the right morning, a couple ounces of canned pork tasted like the memory of a kitchen back home. Third pattern break. Here is what the winter took from men beyond fingers and toes. It took the simple dignity of a hot meal, and the army knew it, and the army fought to give it back. Behind the lines, cooks packed cooked food into insulated metal containers called Mermite cans and sent them forward toward the trenches, racing the cold every step of the way. The idea was simple: get one hot meal to the men on the line, something real, something that had not come out of a tin. The reality was cruel. By the time the Mermite cans reached the forward positions, hauled up frozen trails by exhausted carrying parties, the food inside had often gone lukewarm, then cold, then, on the worst nights, partly frozen. Men lined up in the dark and held out mess kits for stew that had lost its heat somewhere on the mountain. And still they were grateful, because even a half-cold real meal was proof that someone in the rear had tried, that the war had not entirely reduced them to animals eating ice off a bayonet. Number 8. Dehydrated pancakes. Breakfast in a Korean field kitchen sometimes meant pancakes, and like everything else, they came out of a box. Dehydrated pancake mix stirred with water and cooked on a griddle produced flat, pale, slightly rubbery rounds that bore only a passing resemblance to the pancakes a man remembered from a Sunday morning at home. There was rarely syrup, sometimes a smear of margarine or a spoonful of jam from a ration tin, and men made do. But the appeal was not the pancake. It was the ritual, the sheer normalcy of a stack of pancakes on a plate, a 5-minute illusion that the world still worked the way it used to. Soldiers ate them fast before the cold could steal the heat, and for a few minutes a mess line in the frozen mountains felt almost like a diner counter back in the States. In that war, a reminder of home was its own kind of nutrition. Number 7. Peanut butter. The small tin of peanut butter in a ration pack was one of the most versatile things a soldier carried, and one of the most reliable, because peanut butter did something almost no other ration food would do. It did not truly freeze. In the deepest cold, it went stiff and thick, but a man could still work it with a knife and spread it on a cracker or eat it straight off the blade. That made it priceless. When every can in the box was a frozen brick, the peanut butter was still food, still fat and protein, a body could use right now without a heat tab. Men spread it on hardtack to make the crackers edible, ate spoonfuls on patrol for quick energy, mixed it into whatever they could to stretch a thin meal. Nobody wrote home about peanut butter, but in a war fought at 30 below, the food that refused to freeze was worth more than the food that tasted better. Number 6. Canned frankfurters. Small canned frankfurters and Vienna-style sausages turned up in ration supplies, and they were a strange, slippery little meal that men had mixed feelings about. Packed in a light broth or their own juices, the little sausages were fully cooked and ready to eat, which was their great virtue in a war where fire was dangerous. A man could open the can and eat them cold if he had to, no heat required, and get a quick dose of salt, fat, and protein. The texture was soft, the flavor mild, and men who were not desperate found them a little sad. But the men on the line were usually desperate, and a can of ready-to-eat frankfurters that did not demand a fire or a long thaw was exactly the kind of practical, unglamorous food that kept a rifle company moving. Diced into beans or rice, they stretched a meal. Eaten straight from the tin on a freezing night, they were fuel, and fuel was the whole game. Number 5. Rice from the land. Not every meal in Korea came out of an American can. When supply lines broke down, when units moved fast and light, soldiers ate what the country itself provided. And in Korea, that meant rice. Men traded rations to local farmers for it, found it in abandoned villages, or were fed it by Korean civilians and Allied soldiers who cooked it the way it was meant to be cooked. A pot of hot rice was a revelation to a man who had eaten frozen beans for a week, warm and filling and endlessly adaptable, ready to soak up whatever scrap of meat or broth could be added. Some American soldiers acquired a taste for Korean food in those months, for the rice and the fiery preserved vegetables that could sit through any winter without spoiling. It was a reminder that people had been surviving these mountains and these winters for a very long time, and that sometimes the oldest local food was smarter than anything from a factory tin. Number 4, melted snow and heat tab cooking. This one is less a meal than the thing that made every other meal possible, and it deserves its place because in the Korean winter, water was as scarce as fire. The ground was frozen. The streams were frozen. Canteens froze solid against a man's body if he was not careful. So soldiers melted snow, packing it into a canteen cup and holding it over a heat tab, a little block of compressed fuel that burned with a low, stubborn flame. It took a shocking amount of snow to make a little water, and the whole process was slow and maddening. But that melted snow was everything. It thawed the frozen rations, made the coffee and the bullion, and kept a man from the quiet danger of dehydration that stalked the trenches, even in the deep freeze. The heat tab was one of the most important things a soldier carried, a tiny fire he could hold in his hand, and around that small flame, the entire ritual of eating and staying alive revolved. Number 3, canned milk and cocoa. Here is the one that could turn on you. Canned evaporated milk and powdered cocoa promised something the trenches almost never offered: a hot, sweet drink, a taste of childhood, comfort in a cup. Mixed right with melted snow heated over a heat tab, cocoa was one of the great morale lifters of the war, warming a man from the throat down and giving him a hit of sugar to burn against the cold. But the danger was real. Men so desperate for warmth would drink it scalding, or gulp too much sugar on an empty, half-frozen stomach. And in the extreme cold, even eating and drinking carried risk. The wiser hands sipped slowly and treated the cocoa as medicine as much as pleasure. Done right, it was one of the sweetest small mercies of the whole campaign. Done wrong, even a cup of hot chocolate could be one more way the cold reminded a man how close to the edge he was living. Number 2, hot coffee. Of everything a soldier ate or drank in Korea, hot coffee sat closest to the heart. It was never good coffee. Weak instant crystals, melted snow, a heat tab that took forever, a canteen cup that burned the lips and froze the second you set it down. But that thin brown cup was ritual and warmth and morale all at once. The first cup went on before dawn when it could be managed at all. Men cradled it with both hands through the worst hours of guard duty, breathing the steam, feeling their fingers come back to life one at a time. They traded for it, hoarded the little packets, shared the last cup between two frozen men in a foxhole. Coffee was not really about caffeine. It was about the 2 minutes of warmth and the reminder that a man was still a man, still capable of a small comfort, still holding on. In a war where almost every meal was a battle against the ice, a hot cup of coffee was the quiet proof that you had won the night. Number 1, the frozen turkey dinner. At the top of this list is the meal that broke men's hearts and lifted them at the same time. The American military made an extraordinary, almost stubborn effort to serve its soldiers a full Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. Even at the front, even at Chosin, even in the worst winter anyone could remember. Cooks in the rear roasted turkeys, made stuffing and gravy and cranberry sauce, and packed it all into Mermite cans to be carried forward to the men in the frozen trenches. It was a gesture of pure defiance against the cold and the war both, an insistence that these men were sons and brothers who deserved a real holiday meal. And the cold fought back the whole way. On the coldest days, the turkey arrived cooling fast, the gravy going stiff, the cranberry sauce nearly frozen, some of it turning to slush before a man could finish his plate. Soldiers ate it with numb hands in the dark, holiday dinner, going cold in the mountain wind. But they never forgot it. Decades later, the men who survived spoke of that half-frozen turkey with tears in their eyes because it was never really about the food. It was about someone deciding that even here, even now, they still mattered. In the frozen trenches of Korea, a cold turkey dinner was the warmest thing in the world. Here is my challenge. This week, eat one meal the way those men would have wished they could. A hot cup of coffee held in both hands. A bowl of beef stew that is actually hot all the way through. A plate of something simple and warm that you did not have to thaw against your own skin to eat. Then think about the men who ate frozen beans off a bayonet at 40 below and shared the last Tootsie Roll with the man in the next foxhole. Drop a comment and tell me which of these hit you hardest. Because these were not just meals. They were the small, stubborn ways that freezing, exhausted men held on to being human, one cold bite at a time.